watching and listening to Breakfast with Martin and Angela.
Having a great time in the back room.
They are, aren't they?
Yeah. First of all, let's take a look at today's front pages.
The Express leads this morning with Nicola's family beg for an end to appalling rumours, and quite right too, some of them to be really nasty.
Yeah, and we just heard from Sophie, but it's really upset people locally, and some surprise at all about that. The Sun is also leading with Nicola Bulley. Family insists mum is in crisis. Don't be afraid, Nikki, come home.
Let's hope she's hearing that message somewhere. Now, the Eye reports on call for obscene energy profits to compensate those victims of prepaid meter scandal. That really was a scandal, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. And the Financial Times has arms race. Ukraine war drains munitions stocks.
And finally, the Telegraph. Sunak flies in to hold a last-ditch Brexit push. What they don't say is he's flying into Northern Ireland to hopefully get something sorted out there, which we've actually been covering in some detail this morning.
As I say, Angela, if he believes in that kind of a miracle, maybe she'll walk across the Irish Sea. Anyway, time to go through the papers now. Joining us this morning is legendary broadcaster Liz Kershaw, and joining her is another broadcaster and podcast host, very smart, very handsome, Sean McDonald. Let's start with you, Liz. Now, we all sit around. In fact, I was moaning about my post.
You were?
I got a letter yesterday from January the 21st, but this takes the biscuit.
Yes, this is a story for anybody who's never really had a letter either, because all of us, I'm sure, have had misunderstandings through communication via email, where you skip repeatedly sending emails to a friend and you don't get a response, and you start getting upset and you take offence, and eventually they go, oh, I found you were going straight to junk. and it can cause misunderstandings. Well, imagine if during World War I in 1916 you wrote a letter to someone in South London and you're apologising for something, and this letter doesn't arrive until this week. That's address.
It's taken over
1916. The letter was written in February 1916.
So it's taken a century.
And the envelope had a stamp on it bearing the head of King George V.
Do we know where it's been?
No. And Royal Mail say incidents like this happen very occasionally.
That's an understatement.
Once in a century.
We're uncertain what's happened. And in this letter, one lady writes to another that she felt quite ashamed of myself after saying what I did and was very miserable here with a heavy cold. And then presumably they never spoke again. We don't know, but it's sad, isn't it?
But presumably the recipient is dead.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
But
and the writer.
I've just taken now to, I always try and send things rather than by email, by WhatsApp, because then you can see if it's been delivered, if it's been read. With an email, you've no idea what's happened to it.
I wonder if that stamp's worth a few quid, though. I mean,
yeah, that'll be a good thing.
That's a thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
OK, now, Sean, you've been taken by a story in the Metro, and I think you know something about this yourself, which is that the UK is sending volunteer soldiers to Ukraine.
Yeah, also what's happening is these 10,000 volunteer soldiers have come from Ukraine to be trained here, by the British Army. They're being trained in this basic, so they're being fast-tracked through basic infantry, learning to shoot, deal with explosive sort of medical responses.
Yeah. So just to clarify, it's not UK soldiers.
No, it's not UK soldiers.
It's Ukrainian soldiers having been trained here.
Yeah, ordinary citizens that are wanting to fight to protect their country. And I see this through a sort of a multi-dimensional lens, and the fact that I think it's good that the UK have committed to, as we're approaching 1 year since Russia's full-scale invasion. War is not something you would take lightly, but I think there has to be an essential response, and it's good that the UK are committing to this. The other side, the human side, a friend of mine, Steve, is a pilot, and he has been involved in flying them back over to, I'm not sure where he drops them off or where they go.
Probably best not to say anyway.
Yeah. And he has kind of given his own words, he's looking in the eyes of people and thinking, are you going to survive? These are just young men, just kind of just like us.
It's quite interesting. I was listening to politicians last week discussing this whole situation and saying that what we should remember is that we may not think of it this way, but actually Ukraine is the front line as far as the rest of Europe and Britain is concerned. It's not the White Cliffs of Dover like it was in the Second World War. It's what's happening in Ukraine because of the repercussions that could affect the rest of Europe.
Yeah, it could, and I think that is why it's vital that Britain are kind of the rest of Europe and the world are standing firmly behind Ukraine, and so I was pleased to see that this is measurable, because anybody could stand in the House of Commons and talk a good game, come up with sound bites and stuff, but to actually commit things in it, I don't want to make lazy comparisons, but it goes all the way back to appeasing Hitler and the lessons that were learned, and hopefully will be continue to learn from them. So yeah, it's a very sad double-edged sword in that sense.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on now. Politicians always seem to be at war with something, Liz. The war on motorists, the war on sugar, but the war on wood burners.
Yeah, first of all, what distinguishes us from other animal species, and it's the fact it's that we learned how to make fire.
Yeah.
So we could have domestic situations where we sat round and kept warm and safe, and that kind of thing. And I think it is absolutely primeval to be able to light a fire and keep warm.
But you're killing the planet.
Yeah, well, OK, but if they stop my wood burner, I will turn into an anarchist.
Here we go.
Because that is my sense, that's my independence, it's my freedom. So we're all tapped up to, well, unless you're unlucky enough to be so remote, you're tapped up to the gas mains or the electricity, but they're all trying to force us to put smart meters in now so they can see what we're doing and control it. And I want to have the independence. So I bought my house 30 years ago. Maybe I was a bit odd for, a woman in just early 30s, but I thought, come the day, I'll be glad to have a well and an open fire and all the rest. So I stocked up with logs, and I just feel that gives me some kind of control and independence from the big state and all these gas with the billions of pounds of products. So I don't have a fire going all the time, but I do have a fire going in one room, rather than have the boiler on, and it heats that room, and it also heats...
Do you have your own access to wood in your lands, or do you have to buy logs? Logs cost a fortune.
I do comply, because I could go out and gather wood in the forest.
Well, you're not allowed to do that now.
You've got to have dried wood. It's got to be dried indoors for 12 months before you burn it, because the more water content in it, the more smoke it produces. So I do comply, and you pay a premium for that. It's £220 for 2 cubic metres of...
Yes, it's not cheap. Well, does the Mail go on to say why they're being targeted?
Because they're thought to produce particles into the atmosphere. Now, I'm old enough to remember waking up some mornings to go to school, and the fog was so thick that my dad had to walk in front of the car. Obviously, when the smogs, the big smog of 1952 in London killed thousands of people with breathing difficulties. We don't want that. But I think to absolutely take away your right to do something, as I said, as primeval as lighting a fire and keeping warm.
I like that.
That's the most intrusive thing.
If they come for your logs...
If they come for my logs,
she'll be at the barricade.
Take a bomb.
I am an anarchist.
Sean, take us to the Telegraph and an extraordinary story about 2 masked robbers.
Yeah, this is absolutely wild. These are 2 brothers who wore latex pensioner masks to rob a jewellery store. I think we've got the image here. Now, these guys are 37 and 28, so they certainly do not match the age that they appear to be here. They went into a store in Epping in Essex.
It's like Joe Biden.
Yeah.
They tied somebody up with cables. I think they were brandishing a knife. They had an axe. Obviously, horrendously traumatic for the person that was tied up. Now, they only got... I say only, but they made off with 1 Rolex for £15,000. Now, they've now been jailed for a combined total of 31 years, and it took a jury just 1 hour to convict them. So this was an open and shut case. Now, and I'm not being irreverent to what is a very serious issue. However, when these guys get out, they are actually going to resemble the masks. They
won't need them anymore.
So they've learned a very harsh lesson there.
Yeah, in many ways, this is a very old-fashioned crime. Through the front door, putting people at risk, and they deserve all they get.
But these masks, I mean, how many people are getting these latex masks, which are very, very lifelike? And so presumably the people in the shop would not have realised they were masks. They thought they were...
Yeah.
I mean, as you can see, there are photographs of them in the Telegraph, and both guys have got big heads of hair, but in the photographs there, they're bald on them. I mean, they were very, very lifelike, weren't they?
But, I mean, there is a slightly comical element to it. It's, honestly, if it wasn't such a severe outcome with people being tied up and threatened, it's sort of like something out of a Carry On film. But 31 years between them.
I do like the kind of sting in the tail. As you said, Sean, they're going to be pensioners themselves when they get out and enjoy that prison food, lads. Now, Liz, here's one that you were shouting, "I'm an anarchist" earlier, and let's talk about this. Cancel culture once again. Ridiculous story. They're going to try and ban the name King.
Well, it's not deliberate. It's just so pointless and stupid. And we're talking earlier on about artificial intelligence. This is an algorithm on Twitter which has looked at the name of a band, a huge British cultural asset, and decided that this is well dodgy because the band is called Kinks. So
so what they say? What, like kinky?
It says it's the algorithm detected or presumed that this Twitter account was promoting kinky sex.
If only.
Do they not know the music?
No, well, Ray Davies says all we're doing is trying to promote our music.
Yeah, well, Ray Davies was the leader of the Kinks, wasn't he? Yeah.
And they do say that they did give the band the name The Kinks in the early 60s to try and be a bit edgy and provocative. Yeah. But I just thought, where's it going to... Because if you think of some of their songs, All Day and All the Night, I Want to Be With You, it's not enough to be with you in the daytime, I want to be with you all night as well. Oh, you can't say that. Anyway, then I started thinking
about... All day and all of the night.
And then
they also did that song Lola
about trans.
A very progressive song about a trans person in a bar in Soho. So they're hardly offenders. It's ridiculous.
Well, who's next? Right, well, on Twitter, look out for the disappearance of Sex Pistols, Buzzcocks, Stranglers, Slits, Ruts, and I'm going as far as to say...
Bands, of course.
Throbbing Gristle.
Yeah, I remember them.
Oh, that's a new one.
And Dead Kennedys, Tasteless, but there's some I just won't say. I did say one outside, and you and the doorman just went, are you kidding? You used to say that on Radio 1.
I gasped, so that's one that's probably fair not to people.
What happens now then to kinky boots? Are we not allowed to talk about them either then?
Oh, we don't know about that.
So Sean, as the youngest person on this, if I may...
By a small margin between
your age,
Angela and I.
What do you think?
Oh, he's so generous.
All this nonsense, because I mean, I'm just like, oh my God, get a life. But I mean, do people actually believe this nonsense?
Well, I mean, to immediately debunk this one is cancel culture. This is Twitter, and it's run by Elon Musk, who is completely against it. So I think this has just been a bit of an oversight in terms of
technical glitch. Yeah.
It's ridiculous and it's comical, and it's given us a good laugh.
But I think we were talking a couple of weeks ago about Stanford University that have come out with an extraordinary list of things. You're not allowed to talk about all sorts of things.
Oh, yeah, you should replace.
Yes, you can't talk about flogging a dead horse anymore because that will upset people.
Yeah,
Blacklist, you can't have that.
I saw people all across the board and across the social-political spectrum who completely railed against that. So I think it's just people trying to be a wee bit provocative, maybe get their name in the news. It's just silly. I think I said the other week we could be very analytical about it. We could discuss it and look at the pros and cons, or we could just take what I think and say, shut up, mate. Yeah, let it go.
There was an article yesterday in one of the papers written by a woman who's a yoga teacher, and she was beating herself up, and she's saying, I don't know if I can teach yoga anymore because, you know, I'm white and British and it's cultural appropriation, and I feel guilty about teaching yoga. And that went in my folder, FFS.
Some of the positions, yes, absolutely.
Can we, as we've got you guys here, we've got a few more minutes left, can we go back to some of the topics in our People's Poll?
Yes.
I'm interested, Sean, let's come to you, because ULEZ is something that's caused a huge amount of outrage amongst sort of working class people who having to pay £12.5 to use their cars per day, especially like white van men and women. As someone from the political left of the spectrum, do you defend this sort of taxation dressed as salvation, or do you understand it really is hammering people? We should stop this intrusion and this highway robbery.
Yeah, it's difficult. My sympathies always lie with the people and with people that are having to pay it, and that are this sort of tax or charge is becoming incumbent incumbent upon them. I sympathise. It's a bit of an unenviable position to be in, because you have to be seen to be doing something to tackle climate change, or to, not even climate change, but the climate in which we operate. You know, Glasgow, for example, had some of the worst sort of general pollution up in the city centre through buses and cars that were maybe past that, they've seen better days. So yeah, I think in terms of local authorities and the government, they have to be doing something. But I completely sympathise with people who will then have to pay, and it is always the people at the lower end of the earning spectrum.
The people who can't afford those modern cars.
Liz, quickly, ULEZ, should we scrap it?
We should scrap it. I know somebody who lives in South London, and every time she wants to get a car off her drive to go to the shops or work or visit, she has to pay 12 every, so she's having to buy a different car. It also has an impact on the important British motor manufacturing industry, because they are totally confused. We were told to buy diesel cars.
Yeah.
Then in London, to bring in a diesel car, there was a 50% premium on parking. There was the pollution charge. Then we were told to get electric cars, and then people haven't got enough charging points, and now the factories are all built up to build electric cars, and nobody's buying them. They're buying petrol cars.
And nobody has thought long term.
No.
What's going to happen to the national grid when in, 2025, is it, or 2030, we've all got to have electric cars?
I hope it's not 2025, that's only 18
It's very
months.
soon. Sorry, not 20. Yes, but it's about 10 years off.
Good.
If the national grid actually collapses, we will just have blackouts. And I read an article yesterday which said we're going to need something like 27 new power stations to supply the national grid.
They'll never build them because they just haven't.
It takes 20 years to build them, and we're talking about in 12 years' time.
We have to wrap up at that. Liz Kershaw, Sean McDonald, thank you very much. And didn't